Hello and welcome to This Ain't My Life, where we talk about how to overcome all the challenges in our life and we find ways to find fulfillment through reaching our divine destination. Today, we have a very special topic. We're going to be talking about the moon is falling. This is a part 2 series. And as you can see by the subtitle, it says why the modern woman is failing. So let me just give you a brief synopsis as to how I arrived to the title, The Moon is Falling. The prophet Joseph had a dream, and in his dream, he saw 11 stars, the sun, the moon prostrate themselves to him. And as he goes on to interpret what that means, we come to learn that the stars are representative of his brothers, his siblings. The sun represents his father and the moon represents his mother. So hence we have the title here, the moon, which we are going to directly correlate to the woman as in Joseph's dream. So this is how we arrive to the title, the moon is falling. So please bear with me. This is going to be a very intricate and comprehensive podcast for you to listen to. And do not become too personal or become too agitated by what you are learning in this podcast. This is strictly to help you grow and become better. So let's not over criticize or over analyze, but let's use this as a platform to learn to be better. So let's get right to it. The universe has an order, and the universal order is that the moon follows the sun. The moon and the earth are constantly in orbit, circumferencing through their own orbital structure, their own orbital flow. They are constantly chasing the sun. And this goes on throughout infinity and our wide, vast universe. The universe that no one seems to know how expansive, how wide, or how big it is. The earth is constantly in rotation as it is gravitationally following the sun. So let us be very clear about that. The moon, as it is also under its divine ordinance has put it in place so that it is also following the sun. And this is universal order. So the moon never, ever seeks to outshine the sun. The moon has its own responsibilities, its own duties, and therefore the moon is very effective and very efficient at what it does. The moon is divine in its own right. Without the moon, a lot of things on this planet would not exist, or they would not be able to flow and be able to not only process, but they would not be able to function the way that they do without the resonance and the power of the moon. So, just think about that. There are cycles that happen with water. There are cycles that happen with animals and nature. There are certain creatures that do not even lay their eggs or give birth until there is a full moon. We know that women on this planet, a lot of their menstrual cycles are regulated by the cycles of the moon. So there is a direct correlation between women and moon, not only scientifically, but universally. There is a direct correlation. And this is what the universe wants us to pay attention to, because it is in this order that we can find the power within ourselves. So think about that. The moon is responsible for frequencies. The moon is responsible for, the flow of weather, water, and other natural proclivities that happen on this planet. So the moon has its own course. It has its own fixed course. It has its own responsibilities. It has its own duties. And within those duties, the moon is divine in its own right. The moon needs not try to replace or become something that it's not, because the moon already is divine. And without its divineness, we surely would not have the experiences that we have on this planet. Now, just as the universe has an order, man has an order. Man has been given a direct order and a direct decree from the universe. And the order for man is as so. The order is man, woman, child. Man is the head of house. Man is the leader. Man is the provider. Man is the protector. He is the pinnacle. He is the beginning of the family structure. Woman is that support. Some say man is the head, woman is the neck. Regardless of how you would like to structure this or how you would like to explain it, we know that the role of a woman is very important. And therefore, man and woman are very important together, working cohesively, just as the sun and the moon is very important for the ecosystem of the earth. But just to reemphasize, it's man, woman, child. So that is the natural order for man. But we now have a new woman. And this new woman, which has emerged over the last 50 years or so, this new woman is the modern woman. We are now in the era of the advent of the modern woman. And the modern woman is reckless, she's lawless, she's shameless, and the biggest of all, she's unaccountable. These are the characteristics of what today's modern woman is. Now, we need to try to understand, where did these characteristics come from? How did this new advent of the modern woman emerge? She did not come from anywhere. This is not by happenstance or by osmosis. There is a very calculated way in which this woman has emerged. But nonetheless, let's just speak about what she is right now in today's society as we are speaking in 2024. We have been subjected to a woman that is reckless. She is lawless. She is shameless. And above all, she is unaccountable. The modern woman has taken on these traits. And because of this, it has caused friction between relations between men and women. Men and women are pretty much at a gender war right now. And this gender war has caused not only tension, but it's caused confusion. It's caused breakups. And a lot of people, whether they are of the sex of the female or of the sex of the male, they are at a point where this confusion is causing them to act, I would say, almost in an irreconcilable way. Women as of today, this modern woman that we're speaking of, they believe that they're stronger than men. And women also believe that they're better than men. Being stronger than a man is not only relegated to physical strength, but they believe that they are just stronger in almost every aspect. And this is due to their performance, how they are performing within the job economy, their intelligence as far as going to school, receiving educations and diplomas. And their financial status and how they're able to garner, maintain, and also establish a threshold which is bountiful opposed to their counterparts. Males seem to be somewhat slacking and lacking as time progresses. So this gives a perception to women that they are stronger than men. They can perform and produce at a higher clip and at a higher efficiency than men. Women also feel that they're just better and better in all aspects. Anything you can do, I can do better. This would be what women will say to you. So as I'm spewing out all of these facts and giving all of these blanket statements, we need to understand, peel it back a little bit more, just to dive deeper to understand, how did this even come about? What is the history of the emergence or the advent of this new modern woman? So let's take a little bit of time right now just to talk about the history of women. Now, before the 1800s, women were severely oppressed. And I'm talking about worldwide. This is not relegated to any specific land mass. Throughout the entire world, before the 1800s, women were completely and severely oppressed, meaning that they had no rights. Even their own children were not their children. They themselves were property. Any property that they owned or had did not belong to them. So women were perceived as property. So they had no rights and they had no voice. As a result of this oppression, this severe oppression that women were going through, they needed to somehow find their voice, find a way to allow their concerns and what they were experiencing throughout the world. They needed to have a way for this to be heard. And so women began to fight for their rights. And that is how feminism began. It began because of the suppression and the severe oppression that women were facing throughout the world, in particular in Western civilizations. In 1848, this is the first known record of feminism. This is where we would say the birth of feminism took place. In 1848, a group of women and also a group of men, total of 300, began to fight on the steps of Congress and begin to voice and advocate for women's equality and rights. As a result of the 1848 fighting in a feminist way for women's rights, on June 4th, 1919, an amendment was made that passed for women to have the right to vote. So in 1919, women were given the right to vote. This was huge. This was big because this is the first time historically that women now have a right to have their voice heard. They are no longer relegated to being in the back. They are no longer admonished for their opinions, and they can now express what they feel would be advantageous for society and also for their local municipalities. So within their local government, to protect their neighborhoods, to protect their interests, women now had a way to let their voices be heard. Women needed to have their voices heard because they experienced so many traumas with men. The amount of traumas that women face with men, I could actually do an entire podcast session just on the effects and the amount of traumas that women faced with men. But for the sake of time, we will go over some of these traumas. But it's very important for you to understand and know that these are historical counts. This is not hearsay. This is not some kind of made up information. This is information that has been documented. This is information that is now part of history. Women have faced many traumas with men as a result of prior laws and the institutional governance of how women were regulated in society. Some of the traumas that women face with men were abuse, physically, emotionally, verbal abuse. Women were devalued. They faced betrayal issues. They were abandoned. They also often experienced blackmail and they were not supported. When I say that women were abused, they were abused so much so, especially physically, so much so that they were constantly in hospitals. There were many deaths as a result of the abuse that women faced. This abuse occurred in front of the children. This abuse occurred in front of the neighborhood. It didn't matter. Women did not have a right to speak in a way where their voice would overshine or confront a man. And this was the way the laws were set up. The laws were set up where women could not speak. They knew their position. They knew when and how they could speak. And speaking out of turn, speaking in certain public forums was a way in which a man could not only suppress, but he was also able to punish or admonish her for disobeying this particular ordinance. This abuse occurred in front of little boys, it occurred in front of little girls, and there was little to no recourse within society. If a woman had a black eye, then, she was told basically that, maybe it was something that she did to provoke the incident and that she should act and behave better. Physical abuse really had no recourse. You couldn't go to the minister. You couldn't go to your local authorities because really nothing would be done. So women endured and faced this abuse and tried to protect themselves the best way that they could moving forward with whatever possessions and with their livelihood and children at stake. Women were devalued. When I say devalued, I mean they were devalued in a way where not only their voice was not heard, but their opinions, the way they saw the world, the way in which they understood, because we know women and men see the world differently. There are ways in which women interpret certain interactions or certain situations in which a man will not see the situation in the same context. So women were not able to interpret from their own eyes, their own perspective of how they saw a situation or how they even saw the world. Just completely devalued. You have no say, you have no voice, you have no way to look at the world. We don't care what you have to say, and any and everything that you have to say is wrong. Now, I do believe that men should take the helm of leadership. As I said earlier, the natural order for man is man, woman, child. So men should always be at the forefront. And I do believe that men in a relationship should have the last say and the last word in any situation regarding family affairs. However, that does not mean that a man should completely admonish or he should not understand where his woman's point of view is from. He should always be looking to seek data, seek input, and seek information because women see the world differently. They're just things that they see and understand that you will never see. And having that vantage point can be so important when it comes to major decisions. We're talking about milestones in your life in which it can be a turning point. It can be an aha moment or just simply be a eye opener to help you to make that good decision. So always allow her to have that input, have allow her to speak and allow her to give that voice. But ultimately, you need to be the one that takes the helm of leadership and makes that decision. Women were betrayed. When I say betrayed, I mean they were betrayed by men just walking out on them, men just leaving, men having other situations in which they broke the trust with the woman. There there have been times where men have just, they just didn't want the relationship anymore. And so because they didn't want the relationship anymore, instead of just leaving the woman, they would go out, have other children with other women, and they would bring the new child to their wife and ask the wife to take care of the child that comes from another woman. Women were emotionally abused to levels that are almost incomprehensible, and they just had to deal with it because their rights did not allow them to operate on an even playing field. Women were constantly abandoned. Abandoned meaning that if the man didn't want to be in a relationship, he would just leave. He didn't have a reason to stay. There really was no tie. There's nothing that's holding him. There's no recourse. What's going to happen to him? He's the breadwinner. He's the one bringing in all of the income. So if he was to uproot his income and go out and establish himself somewhere else, how would that harm him? The woman probably couldn't even find him. For those of you who are old enough to remember, there were times during the 1950s where men would just say they were going out to get a pack of cigarettes and they would never come home. I'm sure you remember this. These were common conversations back in that time. So abandonment was a very serious issue for the women of that era. And it was very difficult for them to protect themselves, very difficult for them to find a way to provide and sustain a way of living. Women were not, they were blackmailed, meaning that if they didn't conform, then they would be exposed to their community, exposed to society. So men constantly put them in uncompromising positions. Men would, say that they were going to say certain things, which would just tarnish their image and put them, in very uncompromising positions. The last that we need to talk about amongst the traumas that women face with men is that they were not supported. Not supported means that they didn't have the advocacy groups that they have now. They didn't have the support centers or all of the institutions that are in place now for domestic violence, institutions in place for child support, and all of the things that women have in place now to give them this safety net to help them to be able to sustain themselves in the event that they are abused, in the event that they are betrayed or abandoned. This puts society in a very compromising position. Not only was the country facing other major issues at the time as far as its economy, but now you have this complex situation where women are going through so many traumas with men, and as a result of them being able to vote, their voices and these issues that I'm now bringing to the forefront, these issues were brought before Congress in a way to show on mass scale how much so women are being devalued, women are being abandoned, and they are facing these social constructs that are causing issues within society, causing the economy to be damaged. The government heard these issues, the government listened, and the government began to provide women a way out. In 1950, the government introduced privatized child support. This was the first time that child support was even heard of or introduced. And in 1975, child support was introduced as an entire program. So it was the child support program in 1975, which was able to provide women a way out, a way to sustain themselves in the event that they are abandoned, betrayed, or not supported by their male counterpart. The government went on to provide women a way out by introducing welfare. In 1935, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the former president, he introduced the Welfare Act. And this was a way in which women were able to not only receive assistance with medical and food, but now they're able to sustain themselves with their children and maintain themselves in a structured livelihood so that they're not out on the streets and they're not causing plague and they're not causing detriment to society. So this was the Welfare Act of 1935. In 1969, the Cali no fault divorce was introduced. This was the first time that the word no fault was ever heard within divorce. Because the way divorce was in the past, divorce required you to have a reason. You had to have a sustainable and substantial reason according to law to have your divorce implemented or instituted, right? So you couldn't just say frivolous things or make up allegations. They had to be issues that were enforceable by law. They had to be substantiated issues. So in 1947, the National Association of Women Lawyers, they are the ones who fought to work on having a divorce revision because divorces for women was pretty much unfair. Women were not able to initiate divorces, and a lot of times their divorces were denied. The issues were unfounded, and whether they were facing physical abuse, emotional abuse, whether they were being devalued, betrayed, or abandoned, there was always some kind of caveat or reasoning which would not allow them to break the ties of that union. So they were always bound to the contract. But in 1947, this National Association of Women Lawyers was able to establish a divorce revision, and this divorce revision included the word no fault. No fault allows you to now be free of a lot of the relegated ways in which you had to have a divorce. So you're not now bound to having substantiated and valued reasons according to law. It could be that you're just not in love anymore. It could be that, for all of these no fault reasons that we know of today. And so California was the first state to enact this in 1969. And in 2010, every state across the board now uses no fault as a means to establish a divorce. So for women, this was really, really big because now they are not bound to relationships and they are able to leave relationships if they need to leave a relationship that is no longer loving, no longer something that they value or they see a future with. The government continued to provide women a way out. They went on in 1941 to include workforce inclusion. The National Service Act of 1941 established workforce inclusion. This meant that women now were part of the workforce. Women were now able to be included into the vast workforce of Western society. In particular, we're speaking about America. And they were able to now function, prepare themselves to produce, and they were able to perform in the same ways that men were able to perform. Why was the National Service Act of 1941 initiated? We got to go back just a little bit and look at what was going on during that time frame. So we're going to look at the 1940s. What was going on in the 1940s? In the 1940s, we had World War II, we had the Holocaust, and this was the beginning of the Cold War. So there was massive, massive fighting going on. I mean, not to mention you had the atomic bomb and all of this chaos was going on. People were at odds all over the world. And as a result of this, men were being put on the front lines to go out to fight in all of these wars and situations that I just mentioned. Men were out on the front lines. So men were pretty much abandoning their homes, right? Some of them were coming back. And if they were coming back, they were disabled. And others were just dying. They weren't able to sustain and keep up with their family because they were no longer here with us. So keep this in mind. You have men who are out at war. You have men who, even if they come back, they are no longer the same as they were. We're talking missing limbs, physically impaired, mentally impaired. And then you have to also keep in mind that there are no more slaves. So the workforce that you used to rely on and that you used to use for capital is no longer available to you because these slaves are free. So you have a shrunken workforce. If you have a shrunken workforce with all of these complexities going on, what do? The government turned to women. When men were out and they needed to have the manufacturers still perform, they still needed to have they still needed to have performance being done through manufacturing. They turned to women, and women met the call. It astonished the government. The government couldn't understand it. They put women into these particular positions. There was a very small learning curve. Women were able to produce. Some of them even brought innovations into how the operation was being performed. But nonetheless, they were able to produce the machinery. They were able to perform at a very high clip. The government took notice of this. As a result of the government taking notice of this, they realized that they were not performing as a country as high as they could without including women into the workforce. So the government completely looked at all of this differently and said, man, we are devaluing our economy. No wonder we have a shrunken economy. If you have 300 million people, and of the 300 million, you have, let's say, 150 million men and 150 million women. You have 150 million people that are not working and helping to produce your economy. The government changed that immediately. And that is why they established the National Service Act in 1941. And this allowed women to get into manufacturing jobs, get into the workforce at a time of severe need. the country was facing a Great Depression. And it is due to women's involvement, women's productivity, women's influence, and also women's innovations that it helped the country to pull out of the Great Depression. Women were lifting 50-pound bags. They were operating machinery. They were driving vehicles. They were able to do all of the things that was perceived to only be male jobs. Now, mind you, these are not jobs that women would love to do. These are not like the typical, you know, sought after jobs by women, but it didn't matter. There was a need. The country needed this, and the women showed up and they performed at a high efficiency. This is the history of why women needed to have rights, why women fought so hard to be included and to be able to contribute to society, to be able to show that they have value and that they have importance. This is the conclusion of The Moon is Falling, Part 1. We will continue in Part 2 to discuss what has led to the modern woman failing. We will discuss this independence factor, the competition, and how women are out of grace right now and how they can get to their divine feminine state. So please join us on part 2 as we discuss The Moon is Falling. I hope that you have found great value in what we have discussed today. My name is Bilal Alaji, and I need you to always remember, if the reality you see is not what you desire it to be, then simply proclaim, this ain't my life. See you on the next one. Take care.